On June 7, 1989, Surinam Airways Flight 764 was on its final approach to Paramaribo, the capital of Suriname. On board were 187 people, including members of a celebrated Surinamese Dutch football team known as the Colorful 11. They were coming home for a tournament, a symbol of hope and unity for their nation. But as the McDonnell Douglas DC-8 descended through the pre-dawn darkness, it was flying into a combination of dense fog, faulty equipment, and a series of disastrous human errors. Within minutes, this flight of homecoming would turn into Suriname's deadliest aviation catastrophe, a tragedy born from a cascade of recklessness that began long before the plane ever left the ground. The story of Flight 764 really starts not in the cockpit, but in the corporate offices of Surinam Airways, or SLM. The recently privatized airline was facing a pilot shortage. To fill the gaps, they hired an American company, Air Crew International, or ACE, to provide flight crews. This decision would prove fatal. ACI's business model seemed to prioritize cost-cutting over safety. They recruited pilots who were often older, less qualified, or had spotty performance records, but were willing to work for less. For the Amsterdam to Paramaribo route, ACI assembled a crew that should have raised immediate red flags. The cockpit was led by a 66-year-old captain. While he had immense flight experience, he was 6 years over SLM's mandatory retirement age of 60. He had been let go from U.S. Airlines due to his age and was eager to keep flying. His first officer had a history of failing simulator checks, and the flight engineer was assigned to a role he wasn't fully certified for. Critically, the captain who was supposed to fly the aircraft wasn't the one who would ultimately land it. The plan was for the 66-year-old relief captain to take control for the final, most critical phase of the flight. This arrangement not only violated company policy but also set the stage for a breakdown in crew discipline. As Flight 764 departed from Amsterdam Schiphol Airport, everything seemed normal. The 8-hour transatlantic journey was smooth. On board, the mood was festive. The colorful 11 football players were celebrities, a group of talented athletes who played professionally in the Netherlands but returned to represent their home country. They were joined by family, friends, and other Surinamese expatriates heading home. For many, this was a long-awaited reunion. But as they neared Suriname, the weather at Zanderij International Airport began to deteriorate rapidly. A thick, soupy fog rolled in from the surrounding rainforest, drastically reducing visibility. The airport was shrouded in a dense blanket of low-lying clouds. Faced with these challenging conditions, a standard cautious approach would have been to divert to a nearby airport. But the crew, perhaps feeling pressure to complete the flight on schedule, decided to attempt a landing. They would rely on the Instrument Landing System, or ILS, to guide them down to the runway. An ILS uses radio signals to provide pilots with precise horizontal and vertical guidance. It's a lifeline in low visibility. However, the ILS at Zanderij Airport had a known and dangerous flaw. Its vertical guidance signal, the glide slope, was unreliable. Airport authorities had issued warnings that it was not to be used for navigation. It was for reference only. As the DC-8 began its descent, the 66-year-old captain took the controls, as planned. From this point on, his actions showed a shocking disregard for standard operating procedures. Despite the warnings about the faulty ILS, he chose to follow its deceptive signal. The crew tuned into the ILS frequency, but instead of treating it with the required caution, they seemed to trust it completely. The flawed signal began guiding the massive jet on a dangerously low path, well below the safe minimum altitude for the approach. The plane was descending into a black hole of fog, flying blind toward the unseen jungle. Inside the cockpit, warning alarms began to sound. The ground proximity warning system, a critical safety feature designed to prevent this exact type of accident, blared alerts. Glide slope. It called out, indicating a dangerous deviation. Then more urgently, pull up. Pull up. These were automated commands to abort the landing and climb immediately. But the captain ignored them. He dismissed the alarms, reportedly telling his first officer to forget it. He was fixated on landing, driven by an overconfidence that defied all logic and safety protocols. He was flying the plane based on what the faulty instruments were telling him, not on the reality of his dangerously low altitude. At about 4:43 a.m. local time, just 2.5 miles from the runway, the inevitable happened. While still hundreds of feet too low, the aircraft's right wingtip sliced through the top of a tree, the impact was jarring. A split second later, the right engine hit another tree, and the DC-8 began to cartwheel through the dense rainforest. The aircraft broke apart violently, its fuselage shredding as it slammed into the swampy ground. A massive fireball erupted, engulfing the wreckage and turning the dark jungle into a scene of unimaginable horror. The homecoming had ended in a fiery catastrophe. Of the 187 people on board, 176 lost their lives. The crash instantly became a national trauma for Suriname, a small country of just over 400,000 people. The loss was profound and personal. The entire nation mourned the colorful 11, a generation of footballing talent wiped out in an instant. The loss of military leaders and prominent community figures on the flight sent further shockwaves through the country. Miraculously, 11 people survived. Most were seated in the tail section, which broke away on impact and was thrown clear of the main inferno. One of the survivors was a footballer, Ediu Nandal. He managed to unbuckle himself and crawl out of the mangled fuselage, his body burned and cut, but alive. The investigation that followed was swift and damning. Investigators pointed to the glaring carelessness and recklessness of the captain. His decision to descend below the minimum safe altitude without having the runway in sight, his reliance on a known faulty navigation aid, and his deliberate ignorance of multiple automated warnings were the direct causes of the crash. But the blame extended far beyond the cockpit. The report heavily criticized Surinam Airways for its weak oversight and its contract with Aircrew International. ACI's practice of hiring an overage, underqualified crew was described as a contract to kill. The entire system had failed, from corporate decision-making down to the final fatal actions of the pilot. Today, a memorial stands near the crash site, a quiet tribute to the 176 lives lost. The tragedy of Surinam Airways Flight 764 serves as a chilling lesson in aviation safety. It highlights how a chain of poor decisions, corporate greed, regulatory loopholes, and a pilot's fatal hubris can combine to create disaster. It's a reminder that no matter how advanced the technology, the human element remains the most critical, and sometimes the most fallible part of flying. Thank you for watching. If you found this story important, please like this video and subscribe to our channel for more in-depth analyses of historical events. Stay safe